The galaxy had long forgotten humanity. To the elder races, we were nothing more than a ghost story, a warning told in whispers to frighten children and junior diplomats. Defy the council and you'll vanish like the humans did. No ruins, no records, not even a name left behind. Just echoes, just a myth. For centuries, the galaxy laughed at the idea that we had ever mattered. Civilizations rose and fell, armadas conquered and burned, and through it all, the legend of humanity was dismissed as nothing more than superstition. But legends have a way of returning when they are needed most. On the edge of known space, the void itself split apart. From the rift emerged ships, jagged, scarred, forged not for beauty but for survival. They bore no banners. They carried no symbols of the Empire. They carried only silence, a silence more terrifying than any war cry. And then, across the comms, a single voice cut through the void. Steady, defiant, unshaken. We are human. We are not forgotten. The stars seemed to tremble. The council went silent. And every empire in the galaxy asked the same haunting question. If humanity could return from the shadows, what would we do to those who erased us? Admiral Elias Voss stood at the viewport of the UHS Retribution, staring into the cold wash of starlight. To the council, he was the ghost of a forgotten species. To his crew, he was the anchor of a fragile hope. But at that moment, he was simply a man remembering home. Earth. The memory was faint, like a half-forgotten dream. The smell of rain on cracked pavement. The laughter of children racing across fields that no longer existed. He had never set foot on the original cradle world. None of them had. But every human carried the weight of that missing planet like a scar on the soul. "Sir," a voice broke his thoughts. It was Captain Ren Vasquez, his second-in-command. She carried the sharp discipline of a soldier. But in the quiet moments, her mask slipped. She missed her daughter, still planetside, waiting for the war to end. In her eyes, Voss saw the same thing he saw in every officer: fatigue and resolve. Life aboard the fleet was fragile. Rations were thin. The youngest recruits whispered their doubts in the mess halls when they thought no one was listening. Engineers worked until their hands bled, patching hulls that bore the scars of battles long past. Yet through the hardship, there was something indestructible, a stubborn ember of humanity that refused to die. They sang songs in the lower decks, old Earth ballads carried across generations. They carved names into steel bulkheads, memorials for those who never returned. Even in the endless dark, they found ways to laugh, to live, to remember what it meant to be human. And beyond the fleet, scattered colonies clung to survival. Farmers on dust-choked worlds coaxed life out of poisoned soil. Teachers told children stories of oceans they would never see. Miners risked their lives on unstable moons to keep the fleet supplied. Fragile, small, vulnerable, but alive. None of them knew what was coming. Not truly. Reports trickled in from the frontier. Rumors of a species expanding too quickly, swallowing systems whole. The Drek Dominion, a predator race with fleets vast enough to smother resistance before it could rise. Voss had read the intercepted transmissions. Entire civilizations silenced overnight. Colonies burned until nothing remained but glass and ash. The council debated endlessly, issuing statements, filing reports, but doing nothing. And in their silence, the danger crept closer. On the edge of human territory, trade convoys vanished without trace. A listening station went dark. A refugee ship staggered into port, its hull scorched, its passengers too traumatized to speak. Voss had seen enough wars to know what it meant. The storm was coming, and yet on this night aboard this ship, life went on. Crew members shared quiet jokes. Pilots checked and rechecked their wings. Somewhere in the mess, a birthday cake made from recycled protein was passed around, candles flickering against the recycled air. Fragile, yes, but I'm hopeful. That was what made humanity dangerous. They could be beaten, they could be broken, but they would never stop believing in tomorrow. Voss placed his hands behind his back. Watching the stars burn silently beyond the viewport, he could almost hear them whispering, mocking, doubting. Humans are myths. Humans are gone. Humans are nothing. He let the silence stretch, and then softly he spoke, not for his crew, not for the council, but for himself. Then let them see what a myth can do. If this glimpse into fragile human life pulled you in, hit subscribe now, because the storm that's coming will change everything. Fear. News arrived in broken bursts. A mining hub was found turned to glass, an entire convoy vaporized in a blink. A colony's lights went out and never came back. Words like annihilated, cleansed, Shattered moved too slowly to describe what the Drek did. Their raids were not elegant raids. They were hungry. They were teeth. They ate worlds. Pilots called it the Scream, a soundless black wave that rolled through space and left silence in its wake. Refugee. Transmissions came through garbled and terrified, mothers whispering names, captains begging for coordinates, children who had learned to stop asking questions. The council issued statements. They promised investigations. They drafted committees. They filed reports that never reached the front lines. On the Retribution, Voss watched the feeds. He watched a school of civilian transports peel apart under plasma lances. He watched a planet's atmosphere ignite like a candle. He held his jaw until it ached. He tasted anger at the back of his throat, bitter as metal. Fear had sharpened into something hot. The first orders were simple. Protect the convoys, intercept the raiders, save who we can. Human pilots flew in clotted formations, hearts hammering. Their guns were not the most advanced, but they were precise. They were willing. And they remembered how to bleed for each other. They lost. Ships went dark. Names carved into the wall of a mess hall were added to. Children's lullabies stopped on worlds hit hardest. The Drek were many. Their numbers were a black tide that could drench 100 systems at once. For every victory we carved out, 10 more ghosts filled the void. Anger came next. It burned like a fever and made everything sharper. The mess halls that had once hummed with tired laughter turned into planning rooms. Engineers who patched hulls by hand began to design weapons out of necessity. Kinetic rounds that ripped through thick armor. Rams that hit like falling mountains. Makeshift railguns carved from scavenged drive coils. Fury breeds invention. They practiced in the dark. They practiced until their hands cramped and their faces tore. Captain Vasquez stood on a flight deck and watched a rookie pilot slap the console, steadying hands that trembled. "Your daughter is still on Kestrel?" she asked. He nodded, jaw tight. "Bring her home," she said. It was not a wish. It was an order. Then humanity struck in ways the galaxy had not expected. Not with grand, elegant beams. Not with philosophical speeches. With cold calculation and brutal honesty. A convoy ambush turned into a trap. The Drek flagship that had devoured 3 colonies found itself punctured by slugs, the size of housing blocks. Boarding teams, human, lean, and implacable, fell. Like shadows through bulkheads and cut command nodes with silent knives. Where fire once cleansed, humans reclaimed. The first major victory tasted like iron and ash. A Drek task force, arrogant and vast, broke and was burned. The feeds filled with images of wreckage and stunned alien analysts. For a moment, hope flared. The galaxy, always hungry for certainty, began to whisper. Maybe the myth had been true, but victory has weight, and every victory left a footprint the Drek would answer. For every flagship we shattered, they glassed a civilian world. For every system we protected, they unleashed horrors where we hadn't thought to look. They burned farms. They poisoned wells. They executed prisoners before public feeds. Their cruelty was deliberate, meant to be seen, to terrify, to corrode resolve. Loss piled on loss. A human colony near the fringes, where smugglers kept alive an old planet's seeds, fell in a single terrible night. The live feed froze on a child's face for a second before the signal collapsed. Captain Vasquez read the manifest names in private and swallowed the sound. Voss watched her and saw the same thing the crew saw in their meals. Grief. Yes, but not despair. Not yet. Defiance grew like a scar that refused to weep. It was small things at first. A starport refusing to report surrender. A governor unplugging the evacuation for one last convoy. A nurse saving medicine for those who would never get to a hospital. Then bigger things. Saboteurs cut Drek logistics lines. Pilots who had once flown commercial routes now flew kamikaze runs into engine cores to slow a pursuit. Engineers on scavenged yards rewired orbital batteries into siege-breaking tools. Each sacrifice was a stone thrown at a mountain. The council watched the headlines and argued still. Their forums filled with frantic pleas, then with calculated threats. Delegates debated whether to bind fleets or to cut deals. But the speed of decision-making could not match the speed of flames. Decisions birthed committees that arrived too late. And amid all this, the human voice remained a single steady metronome. No theatrics, no posturing, only actions. The humans took what they needed. They defended those who could not defend themselves. And when they struck, it was with a clarity that made old powers uneasy. Cliffhangers loomed at every step. An intelligence sweep intercepted a message from a Drek warlord. Destroy the seed. Worlds. The message did not reach its destination before human interceptors erased the relay and erased the warlord. A supply convoy jumped and was met by nothing. Its last transmission, a child asking over and over if they were lost. Every triumph promised a counter. Every success made the cost sharper. The more the humans pushed, the more the Drek burned. The galaxy teetered, and yet for every system snuffed by the Drek, another world rose to help. Ships uniting, volunteers signing up for boarding crews, dock hands learning to sling munitions beside soldiers. Refugee fleets that should have been broken became caravans of resistance. Ordinary people lashed their courage to the mast and said, in acts rather than words, that they would not kneel. By the time the human fleets organized the first coordinated counteroffensive, a complicated pincer through a Drek supply corridor, losses were already tallying in the thousands. Friendships had been hollowed out by death. Mothers had nothing left to worry about but whether their child's name would be the next carved into steel. But the formation held. The pincer snapped. The supply corridor burned. The taste of it was bitter and beautiful. And as ships limped back to patchwork docks and surgeons moved among the wounded, a single broadcast slipped through the static on a frequency older than most Navi. Systems, short, unadorned. A voice that did not seek to boast, but simply to mark. We are searching. We will not stop until we find it. The words hung in the air like a promise and like a threat. They breathed defiance into every corner of the fleet. What exactly were they searching for? If humanity's rise gives you chills, share this story with a friend who loves epic sci-fi. The Drek homeworld of Carvo 6 burned like a dying sun. Its orbital fortresses lit the sky with firestorms, plasma beams cutting scars into the void. The Dominion had gathered everything, every warship, every mercenary, every enslaved auxiliary fleet. This was their final wall, their fortress of fear. And into that wall, humanity hurled itself. The Retribution stood at the spear's tip. Its hull still bore the scars of battles survived, its crew bone-weary but unbroken. Across the fleet, comm channels pulsed with breathing, with prayers, with steady hands gripping consoles. No one knew if they would see another dawn, but none intended to kneel. Report, Admiral Voss said, voice steady. Outer formation holding, Vasquez replied, eyes sharp despite the sweat on her brow. Casualties are high. Direct reinforcements en route, Voss nodded. Then we finish before they arrive. The order rippled outward. Human ships surged forward, railguns thundering. Massive slugs carved through enemy formations. Boarding pods streaked across the void like sparks from a fire, embedding themselves in Drek hulls. Onboard, human marines fought with knives, rifles, bare hands, whatever it took. The Drek fought like beasts cornered in their den. They roared through the void, plasma washing across human lines. Ships buckled. Names vanished from the tactical board. For every enemy vessel that fell, another loomed in its place. Fear threatened to drown the fleet. But anger answered. Anger at centuries of silence. Anger at the Council's betrayal. Anger at a galaxy that had written humanity out of history. And then defiance. A colony ship, pressed into service as a makeshift carrier, took a direct hit. Its spine split. Fires roared through its decks. Instead of evacuating, its surviving pilots launched anyway, wings streaking into the enemy to hold the line for just a few seconds more. Seconds that mattered. A destroyer with a broken drive turned itself into a weapon, ramming into a Drek command ship and tearing it apart in a blinding explosion. Seconds that mattered. On every channel, voices rose, not of despair, but of defiance. Songs sung on rusted mining stations. Old Earth hymns carried across centuries. Laughter from soldiers who refused to die quietly. The Drek wavered. For the first time, the Predators felt hunted. Now, Voss commanded. All ships forward. The fleet surged as one. Wounded vessels limped, but still they fired. Fighters screamed through firestorms. Boarding crews tore the heart out of fortresses once thought impenetrable. And then silence. Carvo 6's defenses collapsed, its skies filled with falling embers. But victory was not enough. On the planet below, the Drek had entrenched their last strongholds. They would never surrender. They would drag humanity into the fire with them if they could. Voss stared at the tactical display. The cost was already unbearable. But the choice was clear. Begin orbital strike, he ordered. The fleet obeyed. Flames licked across the surface. Cities turned to glass. Towers crumbled. The ground itself shook, beneath the wrath of weapons that had not been seen for centuries. And in that terrible fire, the Drek were ended. When the last screams faded into static, a heavy silence filled the bridge. Not triumph, not relief, something colder. Vasquez broke it first. Her voice was low, raw. They thought we were myths. Voss's eyes darkened as he stared at the burning world. They were wrong. A pause. And now, the Council will remember. The camera of history froze there. A world burning beneath the shadow of humanity's return. A fleet scarred but unbroken, standing against the void. An unforgettable image, a promise carved into fire. The galaxy would never be the same again. If that climax gave you goosebumps, drop a comment with your favorite moment of humanity's stand, because the story isn't over yet. The war was over. The Drek Dominion, once the terror of 1,000 systems, was ash on the wind. Carvo 6 smoldered beneath a veil of fire. Its once mighty towers now black scars on the planet's skin. But victory had its price. Human ships drifted in silent formation, hulls torn and scorched. Names had vanished from the tactical boards. Friends, families, entire crews reduced to memorial etchings in steel. Medical bays overflowed with the wounded. Mess halls carried an emptiness deeper than hunger. For every cheer of survival, there were a dozen quiet sobs in the shadows. Admiral Elias Voss stood at the viewport, the weight of it all pressing down on his shoulders. He could taste the ash of what had been won and what had been lost. Humanity had survived, yes, but survival was never free. Captain Vasquez joined him, her uniform streaked with smoke. "Thousands dead," she whispered. Voss didn't look at her. "And billions saved." Her silence said what neither could deny. The galaxy would remember the fire, but humanity would remember the cost. And yet something remarkable began to unfold. Across the stars, empires that had once mocked humanity now watched with trembling awe. Alien governors who had once sworn loyalty to the Council quietly lowered their banners. Refugee fleets, Elvari, Zeri, even fractured Drek survivors, sent envoys not to the Council, but to the humans. Not out of fear, out of trust. They had seen the Council's endless debates, their cowardice, their silence. They had seen humanity bleed, fight, and rise. And in that rising, the galaxy glimpsed something it had forgotten: resilience. Voss turned from the viewport at last, meeting the eyes of his crew. Scarred, exhausted, but unbroken, they stood not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as survivors. And survivors build legacies. The Council would fracture. Old alliances would crumble. Power itself was shifting, reshaping. The age of bureaucrats was ending. The age of humanity had begun. Voss spoke softly, almost to himself, yet the bridge seemed to hold its breath. "We don't want a graveyard," he said. "We want a future. And in that future, humanity's name would never again be erased." The stars burned silently outside, countless and cold. But in their light, a spark had been rekindled. A myth reborn, a legend returned, a truth undeniable. Humanity was back, and the galaxy would never forget. If this ending gave you goosebumps, hit like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who loves epic. HFY Tales, because this is just the beginning.